What if the cold that crept through your childhood home wasn't just weather, but memory itself, testing who you'd become? I used to think the drafts in our kitchen came from cracked boards or careless hands. But later, I realized some winters don't come from outside at all. They come from silence. And in our house, silence had a way of cutting deeper than the wind. The winter I turned 7, the frost came earlier than anyone expected. By dawn, the windows had drawn white breath across their panes, and the kettle took nearly an hour to sing. Ellie, little, thin-armed, slow to speak, sat on the wooden floor near the stove, tracing the pattern of smoke in the air, as if she could write warmth into being. The kitchen smelled of ash and bread gone stale. The firewood was damp again, and Mother's patience was thin. She never raised her voice, but her silence, that sharp, waiting kind, could make even the walls lean away from her. I remember her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands red from scrubbing and wringing, her breath steady as the clock that refused to rush. Everything about her said, "Endure quietly." And maybe that's what I learned before I ever learned my letters. That love in our house was measured by who could bear the most cold without complaint. Every gust found its way in somehow, through cracks beneath the door, between loose window frames, through the seams of the floorboards that creaked like old bones. And each time, I'd look toward the door, half hoping someone might knock and bring warmth with them. But the only visitor that winter was the wind itself, and the way it moaned through the chimney, as if trying to say what none of us dared. Father was away, again. He was always working, though I learned later that word could mean almost anything. The night he left, he pressed a penny into my hand and said, "Keep this. You'll know when it's time to spend it." But I never did. I just held it sometimes, to remember that once he'd thought of me. That penny was warmer than most of the room. Mother worked late by candlelight, mending shirts for other families, her eyes pale and tired. I used to think she was born in winter, not because she loved it, but because she understood it better than anyone. Sometimes, when the wind rattled too hard, she'd whisper, almost to herself, "Don't flinch, Ellie. The house only tests the ones who plan to stay." That was her way of saying, endure. But as a child, I didn't understand the cost of that word. I thought endurance meant silence. So I learned to hold my breath when the fire burned low, to fold my feelings small enough to fit between spoon and saucer, to speak softly, even when my heart wanted to scream. And yet, some part of me knew that silence was teaching me something dangerous. That if I stayed too quiet for too long, I might one day forget the sound of my own warmth. One night, the latch on the back door broke. The storm outside found its chance, and the wind came rushing in like a living thing, scattering flour from the table, lifting the edges of Mother's mending cloth into a frenzy. She moved fast, pressing her body against the door, hair wild, apron snapping in the gale. I remember the look on her face. Not fear, not anger, but something older. A kind of steady defiance. She told me, "Hold the candle." And I did. Both hands trembling, flames swaying in the dark. When she finally forced the latch back in place, the silence that followed felt holy. We stood there, two shapes in a flickering room, and I thought, so this is what it means to fight the wind and win. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, then tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. That was the closest thing to tenderness winter ever allowed us. By morning, the frost had eased its grip. The sun came pale and patient through the kitchen window, turning every patch of ice into tiny shards of light. Mother brewed tea in silence, and for once, the kettle sang clear and bright. When she handed me my cup, her hands brushed mine. And though we neither of us spoke, I think we both knew that something had shifted. It wasn't warmth exactly. It was understanding. The kind that doesn't melt when the fire burns out. Now, years later, I can still hear that wind. Every time I open a door and feel cold brush past my ankles, I remember how that kitchen taught me the first rule of becoming. If you can learn to make peace with the draft, you can survive almost any winter. But survival isn't the same as warmth, and I've spent most of my life trying to unlearn that difference. Sometimes when I'm alone in my own kitchen, I catch myself pressing my palm to the floorboards, searching for that same draft. Not because I miss the cold, but because I miss the girl who once believed she could keep it out. In the next memory, the cold follows me beyond the kitchen walls, into the schoolyard, where kindness arrives in the strangest form. A borrowed coat and the first time someone dared to share their warmth. Next time, borrowed coat. Follow the channel and walk with me. The winter's not over yet, and neither is the story.